Hey everybody! Thank you for joining me for a Good Friday story today, or a session today. We will be talking about Good Friday, obviously, and that is kind of the tipping point to our whole story, what we've been leading up to, and then what's on the other side. But it's that middle point of our Easter story and the main point of our Easter story. So, how did you guys enjoy your Maundy Thursday meal? We had our cedar meal and we quite enjoyed it. We made some fresh pitas because I ran out, and so that was kind of a fun thing to do with the kids. And I think that's something the Corral said is something we'll be having again because it was quite enjoyed at our house. So hopefully you guys enjoyed your meal. Today we're going to be pulling out. There's your Good Friday bag, and actually there isn't a Good Friday bag, but what I want you to bring out is the candle. So there's an unlit candle in your bag, and we won't be lighting it today, but we're going to set it because we are going to be talking about extinguished light today. So our symbols for Good Friday, we have the leather strip, the crown of thorns, the 3 nails, the 1 dice, the spear, and the gauze. So this is the most of our timeline. So it goes all the way from here all the way over to there. So see, that's a big chunk of our timeline here. So we're going to cover lots of things. There is lots of scripture readings in there if you guys want to go through and do that. I know that's something I've been enjoying. I haven't been doing it with my boys so much, but if they want to, they would be welcome to. And without further ado, we will cut to Susan, who is going to explain to us about our symbols today.
Then in the next resurrection egg, we have this little scrap of leather, and that's to remind us that the Jewish soldiers, when they took Jesus in, they lashed him with a whip because they were figuring that he was a treasonous person against the state, the Roman state, and that's what they did to people that they thought were a threat to the Roman state. So it was pretty awful. Jesus got lashed like that with a whip. And then our next resurrection egg has the crown of thorns. So you know how a king or a queen usually wears a crown, and that's how you can tell that they're a king or a queen? So the Romans were making fun of Jesus because remember he came riding in on that donkey, and people said, if you're a king, where's your crown? And so they made him a crown. They wove together. You know what rose bushes are like, how prickly they are? They wove something like that together and stuck on his head and stuck it in so the thorns would bite him. So it was really nasty. Then our next resurrection egg is the nails. And so the nails that they used to nail Jesus onto the cross. After they had nailed Jesus onto the cross, we've got the next resurrection egg, we've got a dice, because the Roman soldiers beneath him, they played a game of chance with dice to see who would win Jesus' cloak. So because they knew that he wasn't going to need his cloak anymore, that's what they would do. They didn't give it back to the family. That was partly how they got paid, was when they hung somebody up there, they would take chance to see who was going to get his cloak. The next thing we have is a little spear. And that's because they wanted to make sure that the people died within a reasonable amount of time, which is a horrible thing to think about. But so they would sometimes, to make it go faster, they would spear somebody in the side so that it would kill them quicker. It's a pretty awful thing to think about. Our next resurrection egg is a piece of linen, just like they wrapped Jesus in when they put him in the tomb. So after Jesus died, they took his family, his mother, and his disciples, took him down from the cross. And that was one of the things that family did in those days. There was no such thing as going to an undertaker. The family looked after you. So they would have washed Jesus all off very gently. They would have cleaned all the blood away from him and all of the rest. And then they would have wrapped him in a piece of linen with fresh herbs in it so that it would smell good. And they would have wrapped him in that before they put him in the tomb.
Thank you, Susan. So we are going to be reading our Benjamin's Box story, and we'll be picking up at the leather strip. So here's where we're at. And if I hold it because of the picture, I gotta hold it this way. The leather strip. Benjamin, did you hear the news? Asked Eli the next morning. They've locked up Jesus. Everyone says that Judas Iscariot got a bunch of money to betray him. Benjamin gasped. He had told Judas about the bribe. Maybe this was his fault. He said goodbye to Eli and wandered through the city. What could he do? Was there any way to help? Sounds of shouting made him stop, and he turned to see an angry crowd. Jesus deserved that beating, snarled an old man. The heretic claims to be God's son. He should be stoned, yelled another, shaking his fist. What's going on? Asked Benjamin. Did they hurt Jesus? What do you know about this Jesus? Demanded the old man. And they all turned and stared at Benjamin with angry eyes. Nothing, he stammered, and his gaze dropped to the ground where he noticed a small strip of leather. He picked it up. It was from the whips used by the soldiers, and it was wet with blood. He tucked it in his tunic and slipped away. Why would anyone beat Jesus? Next up is the thorn. And this is crown of thorns from our resurrection eggs. Benjamin continued to walk. If only he could make them release Jesus. What could a small boy do? He heard loud cries as another crowd gathered at the end of the street. Hail, King of the Jews! Yelled a soldier as Benjamin pushed his way past men and women. And there stood Jesus. Benjamin looked into Jesus' eyes as Roman soldiers threw a shabby robe over his beaten back. He expected to see hatred, but instead saw only love. Just then a soldier shoved a crown of thorns on Jesus' head, and another struck him with a stick. Benjamin's eyes filled with tears. Why were they doing this? A few days ago everyone had called Jesus a king when he entered Jerusalem, and now it seemed they all hated him. Benjamin squatted down and buried his head in his hands. Please, God, he prayed over and over, please make them stop. When he finally opened his eyes, the crowd had moved along. Jesus was gone. He walked over to where they had scorned his friend and picked up a sharp thorn broken from the awful crown. He ran home. His parents paused to hear his story, then sadly shook their heads and returned to work. Benjamin placed the thorn and the leather strip in his box and cried. The nail. Oh, this side. The nail. Benjamin called. Eli, have you heard? Jesus is going to be crucified. No, cried Benjamin. He's done nothing to deserve that. Eli frowned. My father says only the worst criminals are put to death on a cross. Benjamin went inside and sat in a dark corner of his house. He did not want to talk or even think about this sad news, but in his mind he could still see the evil men hurting Jesus. I must go, he finally said aloud. If this is partly my fault, I can at least be there. I can pray for him. Where are you going? Asked his mother as she opened the door. To help a friend, he said. She nodded and touched his cheek. As Benjamin climbed the hill, he found a large spike. It was like those used by the Romans to nail criminals to crosses. He tucked it in his tunic and continued on. 3 crosses stood at the top, but he could not force his eyes to look upon his friend. He noticed a small group of people apart from the larger crowd. He knew they were Jesus' dearest friends. He sat near them and bowed to pray. But the only words that came were, I'm sorry, God. I'm so sorry. The die and the spear. Benjamin watched as the soldiers gambled for Jesus' clothes. He tried to shut his ears to their cruel remarks. Finally, he forced himself to look up. Benjamin looked into Jesus' eyes and saw such sorrow and pain that it cut to his heart. But he also saw love, and like before, Jesus looked right at Benjamin. Surely this was his way of saying all would be well. Perhaps he would even do a miracle. But instead, the sky turned dark and Jesus cried out, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And the ground shook and Jesus breathed his last breath. Benjamin was stunned. Jesus was dead. As if in a dream, Benjamin heard the people move about. He saw a soldier pierce his friend's side with a spear, People hurried to take down the crosses and bodies before the Sabbath began. Soon they were gone, and he was alone. He picked up a stone the soldiers had gambled with and looked at the dark sky. Why had God allowed it? Later that night, he opened his treasure box and placed the nail and the gambling stone inside. He looked at his collection. It had seemed so valuable when he believed Jesus was the king, but now the strange items only filled him with unbearable sadness. You can't do that while I'm recording the video. All that sound records on the video, Jason. The cloth. Benjamin, called Eli the next morning. Come hear the news. Benjamin stuck his head out the window and rubbed his sleepy eyes. They posted guards at Jesus' tomb, explained Eli. Some say that Jesus will return to life. Benjamin perked up. My grandfather told me that Jesus brought some people back from the dead. Maybe it will happen again, said Eli, but the soldiers say they're making sure people don't steal the body. Quickly, Benjamin dressed and raced to the tomb. Quickly, Benjamin dressed and raced to the tomb. Could it be? Could Jesus have returned to life? How he hoped so. But the huge stone remained in place, and the guards blocked the tomb. With dark, scowling faces, they told him to leave at once. As Benjamin walked slowly down the hill, he noticed a bit of white cloth hanging from a small branch. He plucked it off and rubbed it between his fingers. His parents wove cloth like this for burials. Jesus is dead, he told himself as he continued home. That night, he sadly placed the cloth in his box. This would surely be the last thing to remember his friend by. He tried to pray, but no words came. He wondered if God even listened. So that's the end of our Benjamin's box for today. We will finish that up on Sunday, on Easter morning. Today was not a happy story. You guys know that, right? We know that Good Friday isn't a happy story. But the one thing that I always like to take away from this is the strength, and the strength that comes from prayer. So we've been talking about prayer quite a bit lately and how it's important. And because prayer is just talking to God, however that happens for you is what it is. So when were some times today that prayer happened? Who prayed to God? What did they pray for? And were those prayers answered? Those are some of the things I want you to talk about with your family today. And it's important to remember that just because you pray doesn't mean you're going to get an answer in the way that you think you're going to get an answer. Because oftentimes it looks much different than you expected. We have our little candle, or it's actually our big candle, and I want you to leave it unlit today. And while you're thinking and talking about prayer, I want you to look at it. Because today we're not lighting our Christ candle. Today we are going to remember that Jesus died and there is no light in the world right now. So that's why we won't light our Christ candle until Easter morning when we do our lesson then. So I hope you guys have a good Friday. I hope you guys get to spend some time with your family and you get to have a good discussion about what Easter is for you. So you guys have a good day. Thanks for coming.